Good morning, everybody. How you doing? So for those of you who've seen me speak before, I don't know what the over-under is, but I'm going to try not to fall off the stage because I get really close quite often. I was asked to come and talk about a variety of things. So what I want to chat about today is we're going to talk about internal combustion engines, the electric vehicles, the pace of change, where the market is heading. And I was talking to a reporter the other day, and I kind of came up, started brainstorming. Sometimes I talk without thinking, and I started coming up with an idea. We are finding ourselves in a situation when we think about the future of transportation, everybody's getting into camps. You have the electric vehicle camp. You have the liquid fuels camp. And it seems like if you're in one or the other, you're not allowed to like the other side, or you're not allowed to accept the other side's point of view. Sounds very familiar to politics in Washington, D.C. But what I'm starting to realize is that they are not mutually exclusive. So when I walk through where I think the electric vehicle market's going and what's going on in internal combustion engine and liquid fuels, keep that in mind. They at some point will come together. If we think about what is the ultimate objective of all the changes we're seeing in transportation, it's about reducing emissions and benefiting the consumer. That's what your industry is all about. How do you benefit the consumer? How do you provide more renewable, sustainable fuels to the market? We need to start thinking that way. Think about what's going on over in Europe. So they pushed the engine manufacturer to go all diesel because they wanted to reduce carbon emissions, improve efficiency. They forgot, however, that with diesel comes increased particulate matter emissions. I had several conversations with the environmental community this summer, and I started challenging them. I understand the focus on carbon. I get it. You're 100% focused on that. Don't forget criteria pollutants, the stuff that comes out of the tailpipe, has a big effect on consumer and public health as well. So we got to think about the balance here, and that's where you guys really come in and helping address a lot of those emissions issues and helping provide benefits to the consumers. So with that, I've got a lot of slides. I'm going to try to stay on time here. There are microphones here. I encourage you, if you will have a question or a comment, stand up and just come to the microphone, except Christy. Christy's not allowed. Please interrupt me. I'd rather have a conversation. I can talk a long, long time. Lucy asked me how long I wanted. I said, don't ask that question. It's a dangerous question because I do not know how to stop talking. This is the Fuels Institute. We're going to be 6 years old next month. We put it together, and we've got what I believe has become probably the most diverse group of stakeholders in one organization. This is our board of advisors. I put this up there, and I want to point out the bottom footnote there. Everything I say today is John. It is not anybody from my board. I don't speak for any of them. We do not advocate. We are a nonprofit research group. I am a recovering lobbyist. I say recovering because you never get that poison out of your system. But I do not advocate. We do not care what the outcome is. We just want people to make decisions based upon facts and what's in the best interest of the customer. So let's get into it a little bit. We hear the word disruption all the time, and there's two words in the English language I really don't like. I don't like disruption because it's overused. I don't like the word just. Anybody who says it can just happen has no appreciation of what it takes to make things happen. If we eliminate the word just out of our vocabulary, we're going to have a lot better opportunity to collaborate and work together. When we think about disruption, what is the compelling value to consumers? That's the only thing that's going to allow something to take over the market. The smartphone came out in 2007, and I'll bet there are more smartphones in the room than smart people. Guaranteed that because I'm in the room. But it did transform the way we do commerce. It provided immediate, tangible benefit to consumers. When we think about new transportation technologies, what's disruptive about it? Electric vehicles, is that really disruptive? It is a substitute for liquid fuels and internal combustion engines. It moves people from point A to point B. It eventually will be cheaper than using a liquid fuels and internal combustion engine, but does it provide an immediate, tangible benefit to cause consumers to run out and eliminate what they've had for 100 years? It actually compromises convenience, because now you start thinking about, where am I going to fuel? Do I have enough energy to get to where I want to go? And so there's that rub. What's the benefit to the consumer? Like I said, ultimately, it's going to be cheaper, but it's going to take some time. And this is why we're not seeing a rapid transformation in the market the way some people have projected. And there's one guy at Stanford who thinks in 10 years, we're going to be all autonomous, all electric, all on-demand service providers. No more person-owned vehicles in 10 years. Former Vice Chairman of General Motors, Bob Lutz, thinks in 20 years, Congress is going to make it illegal for us to drive because autonomous vehicles are going to be that much safer. The only time you get to drive a vehicle is on a designated driving ranch. 20 years? I don't think that's possible. The vision I understand, but the duration of time it takes to turn over this market is impressive. So we take a look here. This is what's causing people to freak out. All these headlines, GM's going all electric, Ford's going all electric. If it seems like all auto companies are going electric, because they are. This is what we're hearing time and time again. Every day we're hearing about this. But think about the details. When the auto industry says we're going to electrified powertrains, they are including traditional hybrids which run on liquid fuels. That's electrified to them. Yeah, they are investing a lot in totally electric vehicles, but the pace of change is going to take a long time. Take a look at this. Last year, Americans bought 75% more battery electric and plug-in hybrids than they did in 2017. That is a huge growth rate, 75% year over year. But it's only 1.9% of all sales last year. So if we're in a race for dominance, the electric vehicle market is just figuring out how to walk. They're not ready to race yet. Everybody is excited about them. They're like the emerging draft picks in a sports, in any sport you like. A lot of potential, but it needs a lot of development. So we're still looking at 98% of vehicles sold last year. We had 17.3 million vehicles sold last year are internal combustion engine liquid fueled. This is what I'm talking about when I say pace of change. This chart I put together because I kept asking people, how long does it take to turn over the market? And I kept getting these convoluted formulas. So I just did my own analysis. If every vehicle sold starting January 1, 2018 was equipped with something new, pick whatever it is, and every vehicle thereafter was so equipped, it takes 9 years at current market trends to turn over 50% of the fleet. Think about that, 100% immediate conversion. That means if Congress came out and said, starting tomorrow, you're not allowed to buy an internal combustion engine ever again. 9 years, assuming electric vehicles were produced enough volume to get to 50% market share. The electric vehicles are at 2%. It's a long way. There's 250, 260 million registered vehicles on the market. It takes a long time. So then I started thinking, okay, you've got this Bloomberg New Energy Finance Report came out last year saying that by 2040, like 45% of all vehicles in the United States are going to be electric. So I took a look at this, and this is before 2018 growth rates. 2016-17, electric vehicles increased sales 25, 26%. So I said, what if they continue that pace? 26% year-over-year growth rate is incredibly aggressive. At some point, it's going to slow down because the number of vehicles sold is going to get bigger. 26% is unsustainable. So this chart shows if we average 20 to 26%, still aggressive, year-over-year increase in battery electric and plug-in hybrid sales till 2035, those vehicles will represent about 43% of all vehicles sold in the United States, consistent with Bloomberg's forecast. But when we look at fleet turnover, they'll represent 10% of vehicles on the road. What this means is I think the evolution of the electric vehicles is happening, and it's going to happen eventually. But in the interim, the internal combustion engine liquid fuels market is what's going to drive mobility in the United States, and possibly globally, even though some trends overseas are a little differently. There are a lot of uncertainties in electric vehicles. I'm not going to get into all of this, but the tax credit of $7,500 per electric vehicle sold, Tesla no longer qualifies, and General Motors no longer qualifies. By the end of this year, neither of those companies will offer their customers that tax credit. There's a limit on it. It's had political attacks from Congress as well. Zero emissions vehicle program, half of all electric vehicles sold in the United States are sold in California to satisfy the zero emission vehicle program. Those vehicles are being sold at a loss so the auto industry can satisfy that program. Like it or not, the Trump administration's proposal on revising CAFE tries to vacate that zero emission vehicle rule. They say that California exceeded their authority. And if they vacate that rule, where are the electric vehicles going to go? What's the momentum or the motivation for the auto industry to continue producing them for California? And then the Highway Trust Fund. We don't need to get into that. But how are you going to maintain the roads through a gasoline excise tax if the vehicles are no longer consuming gasoline? They got to figure that out. Once you start applying a vehicle miles traveled tax onto electric vehicles, now you start raising the cost. And cost and infrastructure are the two major impediments to electric vehicle adoption in the United States. But don't rest comfortably, because the United States is not the only market in the world. It's a global interconnected world, and the United States is losing its dominance in the market. This chart here shows forecasts for light-duty vehicle sales in the US, China, and the top 5 countries in Europe. The red bar is China. China is the largest market for autos in the world, and they have made an announcement. They want to go all electric by like 2035, 2040. Now think about this. If Britain and France have said the same thing, by 2040, how many people are going to be elected to be the head executives in Britain and France? Well, China is not going to have an election. President for life has made this decision. It's a command and control economy. They want to go electric, they're going to go electric. They have most of the resources to produce electric batteries. This is a huge motivation for them. It's a political drive. They have terrible air quality. So it's a humanitarian drive for them, but it's also an economic drive for them. They can capture the market in electric vehicles and start driving the cost of batteries down. The trickle effect in the United States is that it makes the electric vehicles more cost competitive faster. And so I see all this stuff happening. I see the momentum, I see the hurdles and the impediments of the electric vehicle market. Even so, it's going to take time. The bigger issue that I think could possibly change our system, then I'm going to get into internal combustion engines, which you're probably a lot more interested in, is mobility. How many people have ever used Uber or Lyft or some sort of service? Show of hands. Okay. According to Deloitte went out and surveyed consumers, American consumers in Generation Y and Z, who have used a ride-hailing service. Is that number 65%? Question if they'll need to own a car in the future. How many have millennial children, and when did they get their driver's license? When I was 16, I got my driver's license. I have a niece and nephew who didn't get their driver's license until they were in their 20s, and one of them still doesn't drive, and he's like 27 years old. I don't understand it. I don't have no comprehension as to why people don't want to drive, but we're seeing this change. Those generations are moving to urban centers where having a car is a hassle, and they're starting to have options. So if we start seeing mobility service providers gain market share, it is a lot easier to make a return on investment calculation if you're buying 100 vehicles than if you're buying one. And so they can see a return on investment of going electric, maybe even electric autonomous, of almost $1,000 per vehicle per year in operating savings. Makes it sense for them to buy those vehicles. What if Verizon and AT&T started using electric vans? You start increasing the number of electric vehicles in the market, and you start demonstrating to consumers, hey, this is a technology that might work for me. I know they drive more than I do, so maybe I can look into it. Maybe it'll fit my lifestyle. So have all these things popping up all over the place. It's going to cause headlines. Always think beyond the headline. Always read the article and think deep about what are they really saying and what are the fundamentals here. Think about this. There's a counterweight here. If we start seeing more electric vehicles or more just fuel-efficient vehicles, the desire for the consumer is save money. Maybe I'll buy that. Well, when you start doing that, you start displacing demand for oil and liquid fuels. What happens to the price of oil and liquid fuels? It starts going down. So this guy in Stanford who thinks we're going to go all electric, he says, and oil is going to go down to $20 a barrel. I got to tell you, if oil goes down to $20 a barrel, the majority of people in America are going to keep using internal combustion engines because gasoline is going to be 90 cents a gallon. And so the motivation to go buy a $40,000 electric vehicle and recharge it at home or try to find chargers in the market really gets hammered. And so this seesaw is going to continue for the next 20 to 30 years until something breaks. And the breaking point is when the electric vehicle is giving 300-mile range per charge, can recharge in 5 to 10 minutes, and is less expensive than the internal combustion engine. And that's going to be a while. I think by 2030, we're going to be there. But then it's going to be the consumer having to believe it and make the transition. That's going to take time. So in the meantime, if 95% or 90% of vehicles in an aggressive market in 2035 are still liquid fuel powered, the auto industry has a problem. They have to reduce emissions. They have to produce more efficient engines. They have to do these things by regulation in the United States or globally. 80% of light-duty vehicles sold in the world are sold into a market that has some sort of fuel efficiency program. Maybe not as stringent as the United States, but they have some program. The auto industry is laser focused on compliance. And how do we build engines to satisfy those requirements? They have to improve the internal combustion engine. And so how are they doing that? Well, Since 2011, this is a study we did and released last year, every class of vehicle has become more fuel efficient. Every single one. Some of them as much as 25% more efficient. And that's going to continue. That pace of improvement, even with the administration's proposal on CAFE, which takes the foot off the gas a little bit, pun intended, on fuel efficiency, they're still having to improve efficiency because, one, their customers demand it. And two, their global markets demand it. So we're seeing that improvement. And how are they going about it? Well, one of the things they're doing is they're going to four-cylinder engines. It used to be V8s were the number one engine in the country. V6s took over. Now I4s are taking over. This chart shows that, can't see it up on the board there, since 2008, the number of light-duty vehicles that are four-cylinder have gone from 35% to 54%. Take trucks out of it. 83% of cars in 2017 were four-cylinder cars. And these vehicles, they're downsizing, they're lightweighting the engines to get more efficiency. Then they're throwing a turbo on it to get the power of a V6. I've even heard that Ford F-150 in a couple years is going to have an I4 option. Think about that. You're going to get a pickup truck with a four-cylinder engine, but it's going to have a higher fuel efficiency rating and possibly as much power as a V6 or a V8. That's what we're seeing in the market. And they're doing that because they have to. They need to improve their efficiency. Other things they're doing, turbos are becoming the norm. According to EIA, by 2030, like 75-80% of vehicles will have some sort of turbo on them to boost that power, allowing them to downsize the engine and do different things. We're working on lightweighting. According to MIT, every 10% drop in weight in a vehicle improves fuel efficiency by up to 7% or more. So as they get more efficient, what they're doing is they're going to make that gas can in the vehicle smaller to reduce weight. Every gallon of fuel weighs 8 pounds. So if you can reduce the number of gallons you have to carry, you can improve efficiency as you gain technology advances. We're seeing direct injection as the majority. We're seeing variable valve timing. We're seeing 2 breakthroughs in engine design with Mazda coming out supposedly this year with a compression ignition engine they claim is going to be 30% more efficient than the one that's replacing. 30% more efficient running on 87 regular gasoline. And then Infiniti, Nissan, came out with a variable compression turbo engine. This is an engine that actually changes the compression ratio of the engine with a physical actuator that changes the piston stroke. So you get an engine that can run on high compression ratio, really fuel efficient when you're cruising down the highway, but when you need power, it changes compression ratio and uses the power of the fuel. Will it get mainstream? It's going to be in the Altima next year. So it's gaining attention, it's gaining market share. Don't know what's going to happen with Mazda. A lot of people are questioning their efficiency. But what we're seeing is the auto engineers are not asleep. They know they have a problem and they have to gain efficiency, so they're doing these things. And we're seeing the push. The other thing we're seeing is a push for octane. According to US Car, this chart here shows that whether it's a turbo or naturally aspirated, a fuel injector, direct injected, if you increase the compression ratio and increase the octane in the fuel, you gain efficiency. And so the US Car Consortium, which is the 3 Detroit automakers, are pushing for an increase in octane. And it makes sense. From a technology standpoint, you need to make sure that the engine does not knock or pre-ignite, and so you need to boost octane to get more efficiency out of it. And so they went to Congress and asked. According to Department of Energy's co-optive project, this shows that as you increase octane and sensitivity, which is a measure between 2 octane measurements, I won't get into the details, you can get up to 7.5% fuel efficiency gain using a 98 RON. 98 RON is about a 92, 93 AKI that we're selling in the market today. Okay, that's the difference. So they're pushing for it, but they don't have an octane standard in the United States, so they're asking Congress to make one. So the US Car went to Congress and said, hey, we got an idea. We want every single new vehicle sold as of a date certain to be required and optimized to take advantage of 95 RON fuel, which is today's premium of 91. And they did that for a number of reasons. 95 is available in every market, it's at every station, it can be sold in California without changing California regs, and they view that as the path of least resistance to get an octane standard. It's also what Europe is using, 95 RON. You can do 95 RON with E10. So there's been some opposition to it because there's really, if you do that, the concern from the biofuels industry is, are you cutting off the future of a higher octane product with a higher mid-level ethanol blend? So you've got some people in the refining industry are supporting it because the deal they've struck is, we'll give you a 95 RON, but the RFS goes away. Clearly, the biofuels industry went up to Congress and said, no, you're not going to get rid of the RFS and not give us an opportunity to gain market share because you're going to lock us out into an E10 market. So you got that balance going on. The retail guys are saying, well, if we don't have to invest in equipment, maybe it makes sense. It benefits the consumer. And so the Fuels Institute's done a study, and we commissioned the study before this whole 95 RON thing popped up. I was on panels. It's interesting. They came out 95 RON about a year and a half ago, and I've been on panels with auto engineers the previous year, 3 different panels, 3 different auto engineers. We need 98 RON minimum. We need 100 RON minimum. We need 102 RON minimum. And the sensitivity was all over the place too. And then they came out and go, no, we're fine with 95. I don't understand, but I get it. 95 RON will give them about a 2 to 3, 4% efficiency gain in an optimized engine, and it allows them to comply with the CAFE standards through 2025 with an optimized engine and a 95 RON, which isn't going to require a whole lot of transition pains in the market. But is it the best option? So our study was looking at higher concentrations, higher octanes. We actually settled on looking at 98. We looked at 95 as a baseline, 98, 100, 102. Then we did implementation analysis of 98 RON, what would make most sense. We looked at what's the cost to produce these fuels using different blends, and what is the feasibility of increasing the production to satisfy demand. Think about it. You want to say you could do 105 RON, you can produce 105 RON fuel, you may only be able to produce a couple gallons of it. And so you need to be able to produce enough fuel to satisfy consumers going forward. Then we want to look at what's the regulatory requirements to get to where you need to go, and what are the infrastructure hurdles that might exist? What kind of overall investment impact to the market? We did not look at what's the benefit on efficiency. We're letting the auto industry do that. We were looking at the feasibility of bringing a higher octane fuel to market over time. And this is what we came up with. So in our screening analysis, we looked at 95 RON, 98, 100, 102. We looked at E10, E20, and E30. And you see here in terms of overall investment to the market, this is what the refining industry would have to spend every year to produce 100% of the fuel slate at these markets. This includes the purchase of ethanol for E20 and E30, assuming a static $80 per ethanol price, so that can go up and down depending on the cost of ethanol at the time. But you're looking at, on a 98 RON, E10 is the most expensive to produce 98 RON fuel, because the incremental octane you have to buy for the refinery without using ethanol is more expensive. You go to E20, E30, the cost of producing 98 RON drops considerably because ethanol is cheaper than having to increase refinery-sourced octane. Even if you're buying the ethanol in higher volumes, this balances out. 100 and 102 RON, you don't even want to talk about doing 100 and 102 RON at E10 because it's just absolutely cost prohibitive. So we start looking at 98 RON. Now on a per gallon basis, what does that mean? Per gallon, E10 98 RON is the incremental cost of production, not retail. This is not what the consumer pays. This is production, 19 cents per gallon more. To do it E20 or E30 goes down to 8 or 5 cents per gallon production. Okay? So producing it, clearly, ethanol reduces cost of production, high octane fuel. You guys know that. We're trying to demonstrate that here are the options. Now, there are trade-offs though. Can we start thinking about how do we bring these fuels to market? The auto industry wants a standard in the next couple of years so they can start complying with their CAFE. When we took a look, I showed you my chart for the fleet turnover. Think about it. You want to bring in a high octane optimized fuel, you're on that market curve. It's not happening overnight. Even if 100% of vehicles have to be 95 RON compatible, 98 RON compatible, whatever it is, it's not going to happen overnight. So we looked at the unleaded phase, the phase-in of unleaded and the phase-out of lead. It took 20 plus years to transition the market. It's going to take 20 plus years to transition the market to a high-octane fuel market as well. That's after we set the regulations. So we've got a former EPA official in the room, and he could tell you how long it takes to do regulations. So we looked into it. I don't think I have my slides on that one. But we looked into it, and I asked Paul Micheli at EPA, it's going to take a minimum of 4 to 5 years to finalize the regs, and then it's going to take time to set up misfueling requirements to make sure the new vehicles can't fuel with the legacy fuels. It's going to take time to convert the market. You're looking at a 20-year prospect. So what's the best way to go? We also looked at what would it take to convert the market to accommodate E20 and E30 and E10 on a high octane. Even if, and what we modeled was you add the high octane fuel on top of the existing fuel slate. So now you have fuel, 4 grades of fuel until the market converts and the demand for the legacy fuels goes away. So you start losing the 85 AKI in the mountains, 87, 89, those start fading out over time. But to bring a 98 RON E10 to the market is the cheapest. It required a little bit of investment at the terminals for additional storage for a 4th grade. Retailers could choose to sell 3 grades or 4 grades, their option. Doesn't require a whole lot. It's fully compatible under current compatibility requirements. No infrastructure required. E20 is going to cost one-time investment for the market about $6 billion, according to this estimate. And that includes upgrading dispensers to be E25 compatible. Good thing is retailers can get E25 compatible dispensers for no additional cost. So if you take it on a timeline, it could just be the regular recycling of dispensers goes in, but it's still going to be about a $6 billion upgrade. Some tanks might have to be upgraded to get there. You're going to have to change some things at terminals. If you go to E30, right now in the current compatibility requirements, you have to buy E85 compatible equipment. E85 dispensers cost $7,000 to $8,000 more than E10 dispensers. E25 dispensers are about the same price. So you have additional costs. You have additional costs on infrastructure and underground storage tanks. Our researchers estimate it's going to be about $23 billion to upgrade to an E30 compatible infrastructure. So those are one-time costs on that left chart. On the right chart is the summary of how much it will cost each year to produce these fuels. To increase to a 98 RON E10 is going to cost us almost $20 billion a year in additional refining costs. But it's only going to cost us about $3 billion a year on infrastructure, or $3 billion up front on infrastructure. If you go to E20, it's going to cost about $8 billion a year annual production cost, more than we do now, and in E30 is about $6 billion. So what we see here is recurring costs on fuel production compared to one-time infrastructure costs. Now the difference here is those annual recurring costs of production get passed through the consumer and the cost of product every single day. Those upfront costs can be borne primarily by retailers who are going to need assistance to do that. So if we go that route, we're going to need to figure out a way to help encourage the market to upgrade to compatibility. On a net present value, looking out over 23 years, assuming the regs are finalized, start implementing in 2027, full implementation, 90% of the market converted by 2050. It's going to cost society about $178 billion to go to a 98 RON E10. It'll cost society about $70 to $80 billion to go to E20, E30. The main crux here is, what is the cost share across the market? How do we finance it? How do we get there? 98 RON is going to get you probably about a 6-7% efficiency gain, but now we got to think about the consumer. What I keep telling the auto industry is, I understand your motivation. I really do. But you're talking 5, 6, 7% efficiency gain. I got Mazda over there saying they got a 30% efficiency gain with no cost to fuel. The fuel cost doesn't change. And you're looking at possibly increasing the cost of fuel significantly for a couple cents a gallon, forcing consumers to buy premium for every one of their new cars. How is that going to sell? So we start thinking about it. Well, let me back up because you guys are more interested in this. A lot of people questioned our guys, go, okay, E20, E30, that's not feasible. We can't produce enough ethanol to satisfy that. So our guys did the analysis. To get a 100% market share of E20, in their scenario, 22 billion gallons of ethanol per year. To get E30, 34 billion gallons of ethanol per year. Okay, is that feasible? So they took a look at history. So, okay, what's the trend of yield in corn production? What's the trend in production efficiency at the ethanol plant? And they took a look and made a couple assumptions. Assuming historic trends continue forward, what is the potential to produce more ethanol? This is just looking at corn, not looking at advanced ethanol. This is just corn ethanol. Bushels for ethanol would increase. And what they did is they said 2 scenarios. One, right now about 35%, according to their numbers, about 35% of corn production is dedicated to ethanol. If we, scenario 1, keep it at 35%, or scenario 2, every new bushel produced goes into ethanol, what's the potential? You're looking at an increase from about 4.5 billion bushels in production to overall ethanol bushels for ethanol to possibly 10 billion bushels of ethanol produced, of corn produced for ethanol. What that does to ethanol production, and you assume the continued efficiency gains of the ethanol industry, is 21 to 30 billion gallons of ethanol a year, which pretty much will satisfy an E20 market and come pretty close to an E30 market. That's not putting another acre into corn production. So the feasibility is there. And that was the number one thing I asked these guys. Like I said, look, I want a feasibility assessment. I want to know that the models, the products you're modeling can be made. So it looks like, assuming that their assumptions are right, and we don't know, everything can change, but based upon history, it looks pretty consistent that the corn industry can satisfy a potential demand for an E20, E30 market with possible small modifications. So the potential is there. The question is, how do we get there, and how do we sell it to consumers? And this is so I lobbied for the convenience industry for 15 years, and I've become very, very well familiar with the sensitivity of consumers to fuel prices. Whenever prices went up, I was the guy who had to explain why prices went up and counter the price gouging allegations, right? So consumer perception is absolutely critical. And we think about this, consumers, even when prices are in the $2, say, they don't, but they say they will drive 5 minutes out of their way to save 5 cents a gallon. They lose money on that transaction. But in their minds, they're sticking it. They're sticking it to the market. They're getting a deal, and they're talking about it. Almost everybody knows what they're paying for gasoline on a daily basis. Why? Because the industry puts it on big signs in front of their face every single day to remind them and force them to be sensitive, right? But they are still sensitive to it, and they're still focused on it. If we're going to go to a premium-only market, premium is averaging about 50 cents per gallon more than regular, okay? So you're looking at a situation where we want to improve efficiency in the engines by 5-6%, but we're going to force them to buy a product that's 50 cents per gallon more than the product they're buying today. Now the advocates go, but no, the model says there's only a 5 cent per gallon increase to produce 95 RON fuel over today's market. That's true in about 20 years. It's going to take 20 years to convert production to 100% 95 or premium fuel. We are only about 10% production of premium. Shift that to 90% production is going to take about 20 years. In the meantime, the price delta between premium and regular is going to stay pretty static until economies of scale start bringing them closer together. So at the end of the day, we might be looking at a 5 cent per gallon increase in production costs, not retail costs, production costs, but in the transition, that cost to consumers is going to be high. How do we mitigate the cost to consumers? How do you get them to justify? I want to buy a Honda Civic, but now I got to buy premium fuel. I never had to buy premium fuel. Consumer wants to buy a $20,000 car. They don't have the cash to buy premium fuel every time. So you want to teach them. Well, octane's good for you. So we ask customers, how much do you know about octane? Only 2% answered the question right. I have a great respect for the 36% who said, I don't know. I question those who made stuff up. Because they made, I mean, some of it's close, but they don't really understand. Only 2% really understand. So how are you going to convince consumers who have been told for years that premium fuel is a sham that it actually makes sense for an optimized engine, and they're going to have to pay more for their fuel? We ask customers, do you know if your car has a recommended octane level? Less than half knew that their car had a recommendation for octane. And 56% said that they were highly unlikely to buy a vehicle if it required premium fuel. So we have opportunities here to go to an octane market, increase octane either through refinery octane components or ethanol to improve efficiency in the vehicles, but we have a serious consumer perception problem. And so I spent a lot of time in the past year talking to members of Congress and legislators, not advocating, just trying to walk them through some of these things. See, I almost fell. And my point to them is, if you decide to go to a high-octane market, get your communications teams in the room before you take one step and start developing the public announcements, start educating consumers, because the backlash is going to be strong. So E15, I told Lamberty I was going to talk about E15. I have one slide, and I think it's very simple. According to the Growth Energy update I got the other day, almost 1,700 stations have E15 in 30 different states. If the RVP control is fixed, I say if, you all know what's up against you on that one, I'll come back in 5 years and that number's not going to be 1,700 stores. It's going to be tens of thousands of stores. Retailers make money on E15. Consumers save money on E15. It is approved for more than 90% of the vehicles on the road. If the RVP control is fixed, I've talked to marketers, that's the number one hurdle, because swapping labels, the EPA has made quite clear, it's not permitted. They're not enforcing it, but it's not permitted. Get rid of that hurdle, open up the door for them, and they're going to start selling it left and right. And the opportunities are strong. I use E15 when there's a station near me that has it. It's a sheet station. I put it in my Jeep. Told Ron a couple months ago, I said, I put it in my Jeep, crossed my fingers, and turned my Jeep on. I drove down the road, no problem. Now, I haven't done it every single time for 20 years, but you know what? There's no evidence that it's going to be a problem. And so if that is taken care of and you guys are successful in resolving that RVP control, E15 is going to become a very popular fuel. It's not going to replace E10 because not all customers want to buy it. You know, we still have E0 sold in Iowa, but it's going to have huge market opportunities because it makes a lot of sense. Shameless plug, we have a conference in May 21st, 23rd in Dallas, 2.5 days. If you have questions about anything in the market, there's going to be somebody in that room who can answer it. Probably I helped build it, but I think it's one of the most entertaining conferences I go to. I learn more there than I do almost anywhere else. So if you are available, I would love to have you down. Join us in Dallas. And my closing thoughts, then we can open it up. I think I got a couple seconds left. Disruption is highly unlikely. The transportation market evolves slowly. That's just reality. It's going to take time. Electric vehicles will present the majority of the fleet someday. Someday. You know, not Sunday, like some people want to say. It's someday. Internal combustion engines will continue to evolve, but the advancements in electric vehicles and ICEs need not be mutually exclusive. And this is what I opened up with. Let's assume the auto industry builds an internal combustion engine that in 20 years is 25% more efficient than it is today. And let's assume in 20 years the batteries, due to electric vehicle research and development, costs come down dramatically to be cost effective and cost competitive. The current hybrid vehicle market is pathetic. 3% of vehicles sold in the United States are hybrids. Hybrid requires the consumer to do nothing different, has a battery-powered pack to help with acceleration, improves efficiency by about 10-15%, but it's too expensive. Those cars sell for $3,000 or $4,000 more than their internal combustion engine comparison. What if battery costs come down, and you can take a 25% improved efficiency internal combustion engine, made it with a 15 to 20% battery boost and efficiency for a lower price. Now you have a vehicle running on 87 octane fuel that gets 45 to 50% more miles per gallon than it does today, and still runs on liquid fuel, still benefits from the battery technology, and delivers ultimate benefit to the consumer. That's why we have to stop thinking it is one way or another. There are opportunities to take advancements in all sectors of transportation, marry them together to improve the market for all parties. But most importantly, if your solution does not benefit the consumer, it will fail. If the government mandates it and it does not benefit the consumer will revolt. We have to keep focusing on what is best for the consumer. And with that, I will stop talking. Again, there's microphones if you have any questions. I think I have a couple more minutes. One or two quick questions? Yeah.
That's a lot of information here, but there is one topic that I'd like to have you expand on a little bit. You mentioned that the Stanford Warren Pitcher, investor in Lincoln Way Energy, that the Stanford professor said we could have crude oil down to $20 a barrel. And I'm certain that probably corn prices are going to remain fairly reasonable. Mm-hmm. Our ethanol costs should be fairly predictable. But you and I are both old enough to remember OPEC, our friends that have nothing other than crude oil to sell. Mm-hmm. They've got to generate cash. In this global market, if they got to go to $15 a barrel, they'd do it.
Right.
And I think the American public has a civic obligation maybe to clean up the environment, utilize the benefits of ethanol. But when it comes to price, if you get world crude as cheap as it could to keep these OPEC countries from having a civil war, mm-hmm. will they pay a premium to buy ethanol? There's where I never thought about this. Not only are we getting more efficient engines, but we're siphoning off some of the fuel because they don't use gasoline or ethanol to generate electricity. So these electric vehicles, whoever goes, in my lifetime, I think we could see if OPEC and other global energy crude oil suppliers wanted, we could have unleaded gasoline less than $1 a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can ever get ethanol
Right.
down to that price. Just expand on that. And like I say, I'm 75. I probably won't live to see it, but I'm not sure.
So the Stanford professor, when he said $20 a barrel, that was assuming 95% of all travel goes to an electric autonomous ride-hailing service. And he thought that would decimate the oil industry. Most forecasts are still oil is going to be in the $80 to $100 range long term. I haven't seen anything suggesting it's going to drop low for sustained periods of time. Here's the difference, though. OPEC no longer is the largest producer. So OPEC cut their production to try to boost their revenues this year. Well, if the United States starts fracking and turn on the fracking, we're the marginal provider of oil. And so you have this seesaw. OPEC used to be able to just turn the spigot on and off. We just had to suck it up and deal with it. Now they cut production. The United States can increase production and offset that. That's why they're so terrified. They've been trying to manipulate some of the policies in the United States because they don't want us to produce that much oil. Long term, I don't think you have to worry about oil getting down to $30, $40 a barrel sustainable. Periods of time like we've seen this year, it will drop. Every industry is going to have to become more efficient. So can the ethanol industry start producing ethanol at a lower cost? That's something you guys really need to think about. Can you reduce that cost of production, get ethanol lower price than oil on a regular sustainable basis? Maybe it's possible. Typically, ethanol is cheaper, but if oil drops down, it becomes a challenge. But I think you're going to see a market basket of probably $60 to $100, and you've got two competing forces. You've got the OPEC nations, you've got the United States, both working it. Now, my bigger concern is Russia. Russia needs oil revenues to support their budget. If they don't get them, they just start a war. And that's the bigger issue, I think. If Putin needs revenues, the best way to jack up oil prices is start a war. And we've seen that happen time and again, but I wouldn't worry about $20 oil on a long-term basis. Steve?
Thank you. One point is, I think when you look at the Nissan Skyactiv engine and these variable compression, the octane value at high load is still there. Mm-hmm. And so we have a paper in peer review right now with North Carolina State University, and every vehicle on the road that we used took advantage of octane in the highway driving. So when we have E15 at 88, which is a mid-grade when you understand octane, mm-hmm. What's your one recommendation to this audience here of selling our octane today for E15 being mid-grade as long as we simply add ethanol to E10? What would be your top recommendation for us as an industry?
I think you're doing the right thing, trying to market it as 88 octane. Look, consumers don't understand what 88 octane is, but they typically know 87, 88, 89, 90, left to right, low to high, price goes up, it must be worth more. The premium must be better. I've had people tell me in surveys that they have a regular grade vehicle and they use premium. I ask them why? To treat my car every once in a while. Your car doesn't need a dessert, all right? They don't get it, but they think because it's more expensive, it's better. Now you throw E15 88 in the mix. Whoa, the number's higher, but the price is lower. Whoa, they must have done something wrong. I'm buying this now. So I think that's the motivation. It's really a price point for the consumer. But you're right, the octane's important. We're looking at, through the co-optimal project at DOE, I'm on the advisory board, we're looking at advanced engines and multi-mode engines where the engines can take advantage of high RON, but also have a low MON, so that difference between the two octane measurements, engines can benefit from both. That's why Infinity developed the variable compression ratio engine, so you can have benefits of both levels of octane. We have one more, or you want me to stop talking? One right there.
John, why can't I buy an E85 optimized engine? I want to pay $1.79 a gallon for a 15-to-1 compression ratio. Mm-hmm. There are more of those E85 stations all over the nation than there are charging stations, and there will always be more. I could get one of those. I would buy one of those in a heartbeat.
Okay, so a couple things. One, they're not making flex fuel vehicles anymore because they don't get the CAFE credit. If you could change that, they'll start producing flex fuel vehicles again, possibly, but that's going away because they got the CAFE credit.
I'm not talking flex fuel. I'm talking E85 vehicle.
Okay, E85.
I want E85.
You want straight E85?
15-to-1 compression ratio.
Okay, we got about 4,000 stations selling E85. Okay, the cost of going to an E85 market is like the E30 market that I showed. It's about a $24 billion infrastructure investment to be able to convert to that.
Well, I bet all the E85's already out there. I mean, there's a lot. I think I could go pretty much anywhere and find a flex fuel pump somewhere with an E85.
In Iowa, maybe.
Colorado and all over.
There's only 4,000 stations, so you still have a limited availability. And we've done a lot of analysis. I mean, just on E85 for flex fuels, you don't have the optimized engine. Because consumers have the choice, that's what killed the market. That's what hurt E85, is that consumers can choose. I don't have to buy this fuel, I can buy that one. If you're gonna go to a optimized engine and a dedicated fuel, we have to create a situation where the consumer does not have the option. They have to buy that fuel, otherwise demand is gonna falter. And that's why retailers have been a little hesitant to go to E85. One, the cost of infrastructure, but then, okay, I've got X number of flex fuel vehicles registered in my market. My potential's here, but how many of them actually use E85 on a regular basis? If they had to, now I can calculate what my ROI is gonna be. But because the studies, I had 620 stations who sell E85, gave me daily sales data for 14 months. The biggest lift was about 5% of their volume. And so you look at that. Now I know Pearson Fuels out in California has higher numbers than that, but these guys are discounting on average 40 to 50 cents per gallon, and they were getting 5% of their volume as E85. And yet they've got a tank dedicated to it, they've got a dispenser dedicated to it, and they just don't have the customer demand to support it. If you go to an optimized, high-octane E85 market, you can do that. And then you have the demand, so the retailer go, okay, I'll make the investment because my new customers have to buy this fuel. But that's a much bigger sell politically to get a requirement of E85 than it is even go to 95 RON. So I think there's a pretty
Thanks
big...
to the API.
Yeah, I guess I have to